So Zanjan, welcome to NexusTalk.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you, Nila John.
Really grateful to have you in the studio with us today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation about your personal life as an Afghan American here at New York and your academia journey, and which I'm forever inspired by, and your work in the nonprofit world. But before we get into all of that, how would you like to introduce yourself to those listening?
That's a really great question. And first and foremost, I'm inspired by you, so it's an honor to be here with you on NexusTalk. So thank you so much, Nila John. How I would like to introduce myself, I would like to introduce myself as an Afghan American leader who works to inspire youth, but also works alongside other humanitarian actors to ensure that women and girls around the world, especially in Afghanistan, have rights and equal access to opportunity.
And I think I'm speaking from experience when I say that given your current role at Women for Afghan Women, I can't think of someone more deserving to have this role because it requires a lot of empathy, kindness, grit, and resilience. And I think you have all of that. But tell us more about what your day-to-day life looks like right now as the executive director at Women for Afghan Women.
Well, you're too kind with all of that. Thank you so much. My day-to-day, it can vary. It can vary. So I am based in New York City, and of course, the hustle and bustle of the city itself makes it a busy day just to start off with. As the executive director, I wear multiple hats, and I have staff in multiple regions. For example, we have a leg of operations in Afghanistan and we have a leg of operations here in the US. So it really depends on how early I start my day and what calls I'm on. It's a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of meetings in person, a lot of strategic thinking that goes into the day. And I feel like my days are from early morning to late at night. But at the same time, there is room in between to have meaningful conversations about daily life and things we enjoy. But again, it's a lot of behind the computer, but it's also a lot of in person. It's a combination. So day to day can look very different depending on what crisis is happening at the moment or what event is happening or who's in town. So yeah, it's just a mix of things.
And for those who don't know what Women for Afghan Women does, tell us more about the work that the organization does, because you've joined them for how long has it been now?
It's almost been 2 years. Can you believe that? September 2024 is when I joined. So yeah, I'd be happy to share a little bit more about WA. We call it WA for short. Yes. It's been around for 25 years. We're in our 25th year, and we're an organization that not only operates out in Afghanistan, but here in the United States, and our headquarters are here in the United States. So, just to keep it very brief and as succinct as possible, in the United States, we actually started off as a volunteer group, and it was a movement really to support Afghan women and girls who were a part of the diaspora, who had either come here as refugees or immigrants, and really supporting them in their journey of really displacement and helping them feel like they belong. And that quickly evolved into something much bigger, into a formal organization in which, we're in the United States, we're providing everything pro bono, legal services, we're providing case settlement support, we're providing education, we're providing mental health support. We work with survivors of domestic violence, what have you, thousands of them here in the United States, and we have 2 community centers. One in New York City, in Queens to be exact, and then another one in Alexandria, Virginia. So that's what our work really revolves around here, is really supporting the people who have left Afghanistan, who are starting their lives all over again, but also different generations of Afghans too. So it's not just from the most recent era of war, but also from, for example, the Soviet war. And you have seniors who are living in isolation right now. So we bring women together from different parts of the city to do things together and have a community. So for example, we go on field trips or we have art classes, and it just gives the people who are living in isolation a bit more to do and something to look forward to. But then in Afghanistan, there's a whole other operation going on there. So a lot of our work revolves around partnering with UN agencies such as UNICEF or UNHCR to bring as much support as possible around mental health and psychosocial support for women, girls. Men are included in the conversation as well and in the work because they're a part of the solution, and boys too. We provide classes around protection for women as well and education around that. So that's the bulk of our work with UNHCR, and also vocational training in remote areas. And then the last thing that I'll mention, I told you I could go on and on about our work.
I love this.
Yeah,
This is the whole point.
Yeah, of course. Is something that I'm very, very proud of, and that sits really deep in my heart, is the work that we do around our Children's Support Center. So what that is a center that we've developed ourselves, where we bring in the children of incarcerated women who would have otherwise had to live in prison walls with their mothers, if not given this opportunity. So they come to our center, we go through all the paperwork and whatnot, with the grace of their mothers and the want and desire from their mothers, to have them in a safe space where they can have extracurricular activities, where they can have access to food, mental health support, to medical care, and really just a community and education as well, actually, learning English and computer science and whatnot. So very, very proud of that. And at any given time, we can have up to 200 children within our Children's Support Center.
That's amazing. I think you gave me a lot to work with, especially I love that WA is active both in Afghanistan and outside, because there seems to be a divide in, there's a lot of nonprofits working and they have their own niche, but WA, I love that it's working in a holistic manner and it's giving different services. But I'm curious to learn more about the services in Afghanistan. How has the change in the regime been affecting how you guys work in there and how you leave that impact? Because I think that WA was active before the Taliban came in 2021 as well, right?
Yes, definitely. As all NGOs who are operating in Afghanistan and who are operating openly as we do under Afghan law and within the U.S. under U.S. law, it's very important for us to prioritize our staff, the safety of our staff. And right now we have 260 staff members out in Afghanistan across multiple provinces. So I would say the number one thing that I've seen, and obviously I came into this organization, I would say after the fall of Kabul, back to the Taliban, right? So for me, from the moment I've walked in, it's always been a game of we have to be very, very careful. We have to abide by all the laws. And we have to make sure that we prioritize not only the safety of our staff, but the community members we're working with. So it has been a bit challenging, again, as all NGOs are facing, in terms of making sure we get all the MOUs signed and making sure that everything is in accordance to law, but also making sure that our mission moves forward, especially with a name like Women for Afghan Women, where we, again, openly operate, but under that idea that it's not necessarily just supporting women and girls. If you do support the women and girls, long-term change is possible for the entire country and the entire community of vulnerable people, including the men and the boys who are part of the family, right? So it's, to answer your question, I think it has become a lot more difficult, a lot more restrictions, a lot more red tape, but what a privilege it is for us to be able to be a trusted source in the nation to support over 1.2 million people. So we're very lucky in that we continue to operate there, but of course things could change at any moment. So, and things that are not in our control. But there have been other crises that have happened. So, for example, the earthquakes that happen, right? And some of the support that is allowed directly for the women and some of the support that's not allowed directly for the women, especially women who don't necessarily have husbands or other male counterparts in their lives. And it's the question of how do we get ourselves out there to support them under such strict laws and guidance. And we find our way to do it, and we're very proud to be able to work with and have conversations with local leaders who do trust that we can do the work and do what we're saying that we're going to do, which is really support the most vulnerable.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sosan-John. I would like to talk about Sosan before Wa, because you've had a really interesting career path, I would say. And you come from an Afghan family, but your career has spanned education, research, and nonprofit leadership. Tell us about what experiences informed this decision to be involved in Wa.
Yeah, well, I would say that even though there have been many different versions of Sosan in terms of her career and her trajectory even, I would say that there's been something that's been true all along, even since I was just a child, and that's the want and desire to always be in service of others, especially those who need help.
Yeah.
That's my biggest theme in my life, and I've discovered that through every single type of work that I've been in. And a lot of times people hear the education, the research, the nonprofit, but a lot of times people don't hear what I really started off in, and then what it evolved to. So there are some pieces that aren't necessarily out there on the internet about my life, but it all leads to the work that I'm doing here today at Women for Afghan Women, and I'll share a little bit with you, of course, Nila John, happy to. So my very first job that I ever had, I worked at a talent agency. So I was invited to come and work at this talent agency, and eventually my role turned into a junior talent agent, and I really loved my experience there. And at talent agencies, it's a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. And I started that job when I was 18 years old. So I was 18, my first full-time gig that I had. And I remember I just was very shy growing up. I was very, very shy, but I also loved the arts and whatnot. So it felt really nice to be there and to learn that skill of communicating with people, following up, advocating for the talent that we had, that we were representing, and making sure that they would book that role, right? So that was one of the very first pieces, and I was involved for about 7 years in that. And a lot of people don't know that about me. I tend to stay very private about my life, and for the most part, that's why you can't find too much about me on the internet. But also, I went into teaching, as you mentioned, right, at the education piece. So I first started off in working in elementary school. So I worked with really young children in kindergarten, and they were children with special needs. And a lot of people don't know that piece about me. All they usually hear is that I was a high school teacher and I taught public speaking, and I was a speech and debate coach, and I was a strict speech and debate coach and whatnot. And then, that quickly evolved into getting more into administrative roles and policy making at the school that I was working at. And it was an all-girls high school. But what was really cool about that high school was that a lot of the girls that were students there actually traveled the U.S.-Mexico border every single day to attend, because they were residents of and nationals of Mexico. And they were crossing the border to come and get a U.S.-based education, which I found very interesting. So all of this is going to lead to something, I promise, as I'm talking about it. So you can start thinking about the pieces of the puzzle, right, as to what led me here. And then, obviously, I co-founded a nonprofit with a really good friend of mine. I love her so much, and she's very like-minded in terms of wanting to help people and girls and education and whatnot. So we were working to provide resources for educators around the world, Canada, UK, Australia, Italy, what have you, here in the United States, to be able to work with girls in the K through 12 age range, and to provide them the tools that were really necessary to help them not just learn, but to thrive. Because a lot of what was actually created and designed in terms of education was not necessarily meant to adhere to or support, really, the development the unique development of girls, right? Whether it's when you're thinking about emotionally or you're thinking about physically even, and how that plays into the learning. So research, just really learning about girls and how they operate, and what is needed for them to not only succeed in the moment, but to succeed lifelong. And then this is another piece that a lot of people don't know. So I went into finance.
You did?
Yes, I did a complete career pivot where I went from education and research and all of that to moving from San Diego, California, where I lived, all the way across to New York City to pursue finance. And
so you were a finance bro for
a little bit. I was a finance bro, if you would.
Yeah.
I just didn't
That's
own the
interesting.
vest that they usually wear.
Yeah, the Patagonia.
Exactly. That's the
Tell
only
us
thing.
about that area. I've never heard about that.
Yes. So that's the reason I actually moved to New York City, was so that I could pursue being a portfolio manager. I got this really great opportunity at a fiscal sponsor organization here in New York City, and my job was a portfolio manager. So I was overseeing over a dozen different portfolios of different nonprofits and their finances and forecasting and looking at spreadsheets. And my world became from interacting with a million people, hypothetically, just in a hyperbolic way, right? Not necessarily hypothetically, but yeah, it was very, it was a lot of people that I was interacting with on a daily basis, to now just sitting behind a laptop or a computer screen, looking at a million different numbers and spreadsheets and whatnot, and trying to make sure that these organizations could sustain themselves. But shortly after that, I promise I'm getting to the end of it. Shortly
I'm
after
loving
that,
this. I share a lot of things that I hadn't learned about you, but we know each other for such a long time. So
I know, right?
it's a great surprise.
And of course, the way that we learned each other was through my next step in the next journey. I really missed working with people. I really missed having that direct connection with people and serving people and creating programs and designing them. Anything with education or mentorship, that's where my heart has always been. So of course I went for it, and I went for an opportunity at the 30 Birds Foundation, which I absolutely loved. And that's where I met you, and I had the privilege of meeting you. And I think it was about a year and a half into that I ended up getting this really great opportunity at Women for Afghan Women to support on a different scale and still be connected to all the wonderful girls at 30 Birds. But it was a challenge. It was a challenge, and a lot of change management was required. But to go back to your question, all of these experiences really led to my passion for always wanting to support Afghan women and girls. And when I was a little girl, I was 5, so somewhere around in the, I would say, early to mid 90s. And now you can tell how old I am by telling you that. But I remember clearly, Afghanistan wasn't in the news that much back then. And the way that we have immediate access to news these days, it's not the way that it was back then. And there was a special on one of those major news outlets, and I remember my parents waiting for like 2 weeks for this special to come on. They were so excited to see their home country because they lived there for approximately 30 years. Oh, we can't wait. We had this thing called VHS. I don't know if you're familiar with VHS.
I don't think so, no.
I know, you're so young. You're making
Someone
me feel
out
so
there will
old.
get it. No, there will get
Someone
it.
out there will get it. But VHS, they had it ready to go to record what was going to be on the TV. And I just remember being excited to see my parents' home country. And I'm sitting there, and it was just devastating news. And it was about the women and the girls and how their opportunities, were pretty much taken away from them, kind of like what we're seeing today. Very, very similar to what we're seeing today, but on a different level. And I just remember as a 5-year-old kid sitting there and saying, I want to do something for these women. I don't know how, I don't know when, but it'll always be in my heart. And through all of these experiences that I built my skills, right? Whether it was communicating through that talent agency, whether, with and advocating for the talent that we had, whether it was as a teacher, providing public speaking skills for our students to advocate for themselves, or whether it was looking at the finances of other nonprofits. All of that just culminates itself into the perfect recipe for being able to run an organization while the heart of the organization is advocating for people. So I feel like all of those experiences, as wild as the journey was and different as the journey was, that's where it's brought me today. And I don't know what my journey looks like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, but I do hope it still involves supporting women and girls on a global scale, especially our Afghan sisters in Afghanistan.
And I love that you brought up that there is a theme to all of these different roles that you've had in the past, which is service. But I'm curious how, like when you mentioned the finance part of it and the talent agency part of it, which starting at 18 is kind of crazy. Like you were going to university and doing this, which you can let us know about as well. But what skills do you think all of those culminated in you that you use daily right now as in your current role?
Communication. Communication was a huge one. And I think it's so important, especially as someone who is leading operations both in Afghanistan and here in the United States. It's really important for me to be able to communicate with our staff, who are local staff leaders and local citizens of Afghanistan, right? And to be able to communicate with them, I think is really important. And I also think here, as I'm advocating for the rights of Afghan women and girls and making sure that they have resources available, having those conversations in rooms where there are government officials or, I've never done that kind of stuff before in the past. I'm just going to be honest. A lot of these experiences that I've had, it was the first time I was trying it out. A lot of times when you apply for these roles or positions, it says you need 5 years of experience or 20 years or whatever it is, right? But a lot of these experiences for me was the first time, but I've taken those experiences, especially around communication, conflict resolution, to be able to advocate, but also negotiate with people. I think that's really an important skill to have. And I was able to do that through every single role that I've held in the past, starting at 18 years old, negotiating with those casting directors.
Yeah.
What, I'm not going to give you the example.
What a journey. I mean,
Starting at 18, starting professional career at 18 is really commendable. And I think I can speak about the communication part of it too, because when I first met you, I was just in awe of how empathetic and how direct, and I don't know, like something about the way you communicate with everyone, regardless if they're above or below you, how you communicate with them really speaks about your character. And I could really tell that you cared about the work that you did during your time at 30 Birds where we met. And yeah, I'm really happy to see you thrive at law, really.
Thank you so much. I'm blushing.
Joyful.
I'm like, wow, that's such a nice compliment.
I had to say it.
But I do want to add one thing to that, because I think it's really important for especially any young girl out there who is listening, because I know you have tons of fans, Nila, John, especially young women who look up to you and really want to make a change in their lives and look to you as an example. But one piece, and I see this in you as well, that's why I love working with you or having these conversations with you. I think leaders should, I believe, and I know that leaders should be authentic. You should be true to who you are. Don't try to be anyone that you're not. And if your motto in life is kindness and you want to lead with kindness, do that. It does not take away from your position of whatever you want to call it. Some people will call it power. Some people will call it, just whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to leave it at that. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take away from anything just to be kind and to really try to place yourself in another person's shoes as best as possible, even though you have different experiences. I think that's the difference in making sure that you can have good leadership, is to always really care about the people that you are working with. And that's what I love. And that's what I love about you as well, is that I think we really jive on that.
Yeah, I think so too. You inspire me in that way, like I was having a conversation yesterday about having role models, and I was saying how I don't have the specific person that comes to mind, but I'm inspired by different characteristics of different people.
Yes.
And kindness and leadership is what I'm inspired, like you inspire me in. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does, yes. And I agree. Thank you.
Leading an organization during one of Afghanistan's most difficult periods must require incredibly difficult decisions. I mean, right now, Afghanistan is falling off the headlines, and I can't imagine how difficult it must be to lead one of the biggest nonprofits that's working in this sector. But how do you navigate the balance between responding to urgent humanitarian needs while thinking about the long-term change?
I really love this question, and I hope that all nonprofit leaders and NGO leaders are being asked this question as well, because I think it's something that we face every single day is, okay, this is a challenge. There are so many urgent needs, but also we need long-term sustainability to be able to continue doing this work, right? So if you only respond to the urgent needs, then what you're doing is you are encouraging dependency, right?
Yeah.
But if you're only thinking about long-term sustainability, the people who are in the most urgent need, they're not going to be around to see the long-term change. So it's a problem, right? So the philosophy that we like to lead by at Women for Afghan Women is the urgent work that we do right now and the urgent needs that we fulfill work to support long-term sustainability. So whether it's we're providing the mental health support, whether it's we're providing education services, whether it's we're providing food on the spot, that is meant to go into something that is long-term, right? So not only are we giving the supplies and resources that are needed right now in this moment, especially through case management or even, in Afghanistan with the young children that we work with in the immediate, but long-term, what we're trying to do is we're trying to empower them to learn those skills, to learn those tools, to move on to something where they can thrive when the time comes. And we feel the same way with, as I was mentioning in the beginning, the refugees and the immigrants that we're working with here. So for us, it's not one or the other, it's a combination. And I'm telling you, so many NGOs and nonprofits face this problem. Yeah. Anyone working with underserved communities, it's like you want to help them right away, which you do a lot of times, but at the same time, a lot of leaders aren't thinking about the long-term sustainability, but how do you do both, right? And that's what we constantly work on. And what I'm really proud of with our work at Women for Afghan Women, all of our programs are designed by women who have lived experience. And it's so important because they know what it takes for that long-term sustainability, but they also know in the moment what is needed. Even though we do have quite a few men who work at our organization who are allies and support our cause and are equally as passionate about this work and supporting Afghan women and girls, it's really encouraging to see that a lot of these programs that we design are intentionally built by the women with lived experience who know what it takes to have that long-term effect to help people thrive and not just be dependent on us, the economic empowerment, the education, so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a complex dilemma.
Yeah.
Especially in our world today, where resources are limited, and attention span is very short because of all of the things happening in our world right now, unfortunately. So yeah, I would say it's complex, but it's doable if you do it the right way, which I feel very confident that we are at Women for Afghan Women.
And talking generally about nonprofits, I mean, you've worked with multiple ones by this point. What do you think are the gaps in the system that the nonprofit industry or the nonprofit world works in that are obstacles to how, I don't know, maybe WA faces problems when you're thinking about your goals and achieving those, or other nonprofits that you know of?
The talk of the town is fundraising, right? And how fundraising and resources are allocated. There's a scarcity of resources right now, and a lot. I work with other leaders from nonprofits that are Afghan-led, and a lot of times when we get on these calls, it's the question of why aren't we banding together more often? Why are we so siloed? Why aren't we because there's a scarcity of resources and everyone's just trying to go for whatever funding they can to sustain their programs. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing, and when I'm in these rooms with funders and philanthropists and we have a voice and we can speak, or I'm sitting on panels and I'm giving my 2 cents about what we're experiencing, the biggest piece that I always talk about is, funding is available through, for example, government grants and major philanthropists that love to give the funding. But at the same time, it's meant for a very short period of time.
Yes.
There are very strict, policies around it. There are lots of restrictions and red tape about what you can do, what you can't do. And there's a lot of reporting that goes into it. And it's for a very short period of time. It could be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. And in my opinion, that's a very short time, even the 3 years, right? But the thing is, we build these beautiful programs and these programs that really work, and we bring on the talent to really support the community members. But then it becomes a game of, well, how do we find the rest of the funding to continue this work, right? Does that mean we have to let our staff members go or whatnot? But a lot of organizations have figured out how to sustain long term. But I think, especially working with the Afghan diaspora, there was this huge influx of, I'm talking about our US work, right? There was a huge influx of refugees that came through in 2021 and 2022. And there was a lot of funding that became available. So all these great programs were built. And it really helped the community members. But at the end of the day, a lot of that funding was then stripped, under the new administration. And it was stripped, and now those funds are being reallocated to other initiatives. And so it leaves all of us who were very dependent on that funding to now, just look for any way possible to diversify that funding. So if I had one message to funders or government actors or whatnot, it's just really pay attention to the type of funding that's available to help really sustain these programs long term. And I think that's one of the biggest gaps. But also, if I may add,
Yes, please.
that we have a lot of local leaders in Afghanistan, right? We have a lot of staff members out there who have the experience, who know the work firsthand, because the people that can solve the problem are the ones who are closest to the problem. I truly believe that. Not enough voices of these people are in the big decision-making rooms, and they need to be. They need to be. So I also urge large actors who have a lot of influence, whether it's humanitarian actors, whether it's people in the government, people who can drive policy, to include these voices in there. And yeah, they don't have to physically be here in order to include their voice. They could be interviewed separately, and you can bring their voice to the table. They could be on Zoom calls, whatever they feel safe doing, right? But not enough of that is included, and it should be. So I think those are the two biggest gaps that I'm seeing, is the funding, and then also the lack of voice from the most experienced people in the room.
I am really interested in your second point about having the voice in the decision-making rooms, because that's the big talk, especially at the UN. We talk about generally, like any community we talk about, we have to have the voice of the people who are affected by the problem. And right now, the big pattern that I see is youth engagement. But talking about Afghanistan specifically, how do you see other nonprofits doing that? Especially like when I think about my work or the work that you do at WA, how do you guys do it on a daily basis? How does that look like?
Yeah, well, I was going to give yours as an example. Her story, I think it's so beautiful that you're elevating not only the voices of those who have found some success and have found access to opportunity, but who are advocating for those who don't have that voice and are bringing those voices into the interviews, which I think is really, really beautiful. But you have other ways of highlighting it too, and all the work that you're doing, whether it's with the UN or any other type of advocacy you're doing with the mentorship program that you all have, all of it, right? Huge, huge fan of your work. For us personally at Women for Afghan Women, I am one of the decision-making entities at the organization, right? Serving as executive director. But for me, it's a collective work, right? So on a weekly basis, I'm having strategic calls with our team in Afghanistan who are on the ground. So for example, our Afghanistan country director and our senior advisor, I'm constantly working with them. And then on a either bi-monthly or quarterly basis, I'm working with I'm on calls with all of our staff, and I hear firsthand from them about the programs and what's going on there, because I'm physically not there, but it's, I get all the reports and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's a little different when you hear from the actual people doing the work on the ground, and having constant communication with them is so, so, so important. It's so important. I read this book, and it was a part of my doctoral program. It was the first book they had us read, and it was called Better by Atul Gawande. And one of the biggest lessons in that book was that it was about, I don't want to misquote what it was about, but really it was about the healthcare system and the hospital and whatnot. And there was a disease going around, and all these higher ups and CEOs and people in the C-suite trying to figure out what's best for the patients and how to manage this crisis. But everything that they were trying, it was trial and error. It was failing. It was failing. And then there came a point where they heard from the people who rolled up their sleeves and were doing the work on a daily basis in that room, whether it was the doctors, the nurses, what have you. And they had the best solutions for those problems, right?
Yes.
So for me, I take that and I think, okay, for me to be able to help drive any kind of change, right, or to help improve our programs, I need to hear from the people who are doing the work firsthand on the ground, our local leaders from different provinces, and also from our community members. So I was just on a call a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Oh, my heart. I was on a call with the children from our Children's Support Center. And I met, I would say, close to 75 of them on that call. And it was a long Google Meets call. And I heard from them personally, and it was so cute. It was so cute. Okay, so talking about change, let's talk about change on a very micro level. Okay,
Yes.
so one of the questions that we asked was, well, what do you not like about the center? Is there anything that we can change? And one of the kids said, I don't like eggplant. I don't like bonjon. And I'm like, okay, done. We can fix that. And another one's like, and then it started this like domino effect. And another kid's like, I don't like bamia or okra, right? And I'm like, okay, we can adjust the vegetables, but you do need your nutrients, right? So hearing from the people who are doing it firsthand or who are experiencing it firsthand is so important in order to be able to make the change. Again, that was on a very micro level, but for the big decisions, I think it's so important. And I know that you do that with your work too. You're hearing firsthand from the people who are experiencing it, and I know that you, as a part of your experience, you understand it firsthand. So I think it's so cool to be able to do that, and it's so necessary to be able to do that. Long-winded way of saying it's so important to hear the people's voice and the people who are doing the work firsthand and rolling up their sleeves to do it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think the difference every nonprofit tries to find their own solution and their own approach to how to solve this problem. And for us, it's been storytelling, because we're a small but some might say mighty team.
Yeah.
I think for me at this point in time, storytelling is the best way to raise awareness and do my part in solving this problem. But WA is incredible. WA's been there for a long time, and I think there's a lot that each nonprofit can learn from each other, especially if you're working on the same problem. And I love the fact that you were on that call as the executive director. I mean, that shows great character, especially in how determined you are in including these voices.
Thank you. It's so important.
Thank you.
I think this is what the work is about, right? This is what it's about. It's about the people. If you're not talking to the people, what's the point?
Exactly.
Right?
And that informs your work, and that makes it even better. But let's talk about the difficult part of things.
Yeah.
This work can be challenging at times. It can take an emotional toll. I've experienced things I know a lot of other people have done, because this work is so important, but it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And sometimes you might think that your work is really impactful, but you don't see it each day. And there's a lot of barriers, like the funding and the systems that contribute to these problems that shouldn't even be there in the first place. But how do you deal with those emotional side effects of it?
Yeah, it's tough work. But I'll start off by saying what a privilege it is for me to be exhausted doing this work. What a privilege, what an opportunity it is for me to wake up, get to work, and by the end of the day, if not the middle of the day, feel exhausted. Because I know I'm doing it for a good cause, and I know it's needed. And again, what a privilege to feel tired from doing this work, but not giving up and continuing to do the work, right? Yeah, it's hard. There are days that I've cried, and in front of my team and behind closed doors, there are days that I've cried, and it's been hard. It's been so hard with so many changes with the current administration, so many restrictions in Afghanistan, hearing from people that I talk to about this work saying it's a lost cause, like all the things that come together, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is a heavy day, right? But what really keeps me going is the little moments that mean so much to me. So, for example, hearing about the little girl in our community center who, and I've shared this on another interview before, but I'll share it here, who said that her life was so difficult at 10 years old that she was contemplating or just wished she wasn't alive, right? And to hear that because of the community center or the children's support center that she's at and the teacher that believed in her and taught her her ABCs and taught her how to read and listen to her, right? She now wants to do that, and she sees a hopeful future for herself. So hearing a story like that, or here, just about 2 weeks ago, we took these women, the seniors, who came here years ago, and they went on a field trip to see a replica of one of the statues from Bamyan that's on the High Line here in New York City. Yeah. And they had never experienced something like that before in terms of going on a field trip, right? And these are women who are anywhere from their 70s to 80-something, right? And to be able to experience that, and the daughter of one of those women reached out and she said, if it wasn't for Wa, my mom probably wouldn't be here. She wouldn't be here. That's what keeps her happy. That's what keeps her alive and wanting to do more. So I think for me, what keeps me going is just remembering those little moments and the impact that we have, whether it's on a very large scale or in the everyday lives of people. Or sometimes I'll hear youth reaching out, or just, not here, but I'll see emails come through from young people requesting to meet with me. And I'm like, really? You want to meet with me? That's so fun. That's great. And they're like, we're fans of you. Really? That's so cool. But at the same time, just knowing that someone out there who might not be Afghan, who is so inspired by the work that Women for Afghan Women does, and they want to create change, that's what keeps me going. It's to know that other people, there are so many people out there that care but don't know where to start, and they're just looking for those answers. But also just seeing the impact that we have on a daily basis in the lives of these community members that we serve.
That really touched my heart. It's really about remembering these small moments, because sometimes the problems may seem bigger than the impact that we have, but it's all about small but mighty. And I really appreciate the fact that you've brought so many examples, because I feel like that will resonate with a lot of leaders in the nonprofit world. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
But when we think about what the international community can do, what the systems or people who are in power can do, or even Afghans in diaspora who feel the desire to bring change in the community but don't know where to start from, or non-Afghans who are truly touched by what's happening in Afghanistan, what words of advice do you have for them?
Oh, I have so many words of advice, but I'll try to keep it brief. Yeah. There are so many things that people can do. So I'll start off with the diaspora. Okay. It's complex, right? We are all over the world. We're really all over the world. Yeah. My own cousins are in Australia, or some family members in Germany, Canada, right? So all over the place. Or even here in the United States, dispersed everywhere. You get it.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'm finding in my conversations with people in the diaspora is that they want to do something. They just don't know where to start, right? So recently I had conversations with men and women, a part of the diaspora, who are in Ireland, who are in Australia, who are in England, who are in Germany, right? Just to give a few, in Canada, and here in the US. And every single one of the conversations I've had, it's everyone's trying to do something, but either they're not finding as much success because they don't have the resources to actually do work on the ground there or to support on the ground there, or it's more a matter of I want to do something, but I'm a little nervous to do it, and I don't really have the team to support me.
Yeah.
What I figured out is that we are all very siloed. We're all working in our own little corners and our own little bubbles and not necessarily working together collectively. But what's really cool, and this goes back to some of the education that I've had in one of the programs that I was in, it was a cross-sectoral program.
Yeah.
And I love that model in that people from different sectors came together to create collective impact, right? So, I was in education, there was a person in the medical field, there was someone in tech, there was someone in nonprofit, there was someone in entertainment, and we all came together during the pandemic to create change, right? And I use that model a lot, especially when I'm talking to the diaspora, because there are people who are in the food industry in the diaspora. There are people who are in tech. There are people who are in the legal field and design and in art. And I've been having these conversations with them and saying, you know what, we could do something together to really create that change. So through your art, you can tell the story of the women, or you can help the artisans out in Afghanistan and help them with economic empowerment, which some of them are already doing, which is really, really cool. With the tech or with the digital piece, you could help us streamline some of the programs that we have online or digitally, right? So many different ways that we can collaborate to bring bigger impact. And I feel like a lot of times people who are in different sectors, especially the Afghan diaspora, they're like, well, we don't know what to do with our, how can we support? We're in dentistry or whatever it is, right? I'm just giving some, oh my goodness, there are so many ways you can support and the education around it. For those who are, and I'll move on a little bit because I could talk forever about the diaspora and how much I love the diaspora, but also want us to band together. We need to. It must happen.
The unity.
For those who are not Afghan and want to help, because we get a lot of those inquiries as well. We get people reaching out to us saying, we want to do something. I'll give examples of people who have reached out to us and are working on, I don't want to call it a micro scale, but doing something like an everyday thing or something that they've intentionally planned to help raise awareness. So, for example, we had this young high school girl from California just a few days ago. She reached out, non-Afghan, saying she's really inspired by the stories she's heard about Afghans or what she's read in her textbooks or in the news or whatnot, and she wants to do a letter writing campaign and get 100 letters from other students to write to government officials to advocate for Afghan women and girls, not just in the United States but abroad. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Or another girl who just randomly decided to do a donation drive and put together all these essential items and brought to our community center without anything else, just her drive. So I think there are ways to do it, but I also think there is a line that shouldn't be crossed. There should be respect, and there should be also the cultural awareness. And if you're not familiar with the culture or you don't have the competency, it's not a bad thing. It's a matter of getting in touch with the right people or educating yourself. However the internet is, just make sure it's reliable sources. Don't go from, just don't go off of Wikipedia. Make sure that the sources in Wikipedia are actually legitimate. But anyway, long way of saying there are ways that people can support and people of influence. We've had people like Kate Walsh or food influencers come on and repost our stuff, and it gained a lot of traction, and people start donating or people start paying attention more or start speaking about it. So there are ways to do it. It's just, it doesn't have to be big or on a grand scale. You don't have to be a humanitarian leader or work at the UN or do things, You could just be in your home raising awareness remotely.
Yeah.
It's possible.
It goes back to believing that what you do matters, because I feel like feeling helpless and losing that hope is the biggest barrier to making any change at all. Yeah. And it starts from doing as little as possible, I feel like. Small but mighty. We go back to that a lot. It's been a joy to talk to you, Sosanjan. Thank you for the honesty you brought to the conversation. Thank you for everything that you do. Is there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for this opportunity. I think it's great that you're continuing to elevate the stories and the voices of Afghan women and girls. There is something that I do want to share, and and I'll leave this with everyone watching. But my mom passed away not too long ago, and I'm wearing her ring today. Actually, she told me before she passed away. She said, "Anytime you want to think of me or remember me, wear this ring." And so. I don't know how algorithms work. I don't have the brain for that. I haven't studied it. But on my social media, a lot of times there are words of wisdom around people that you've lost, right? Or people that are no longer physically present with you. And one of the biggest themes that I'm seeing is the moment you stop talking about those people, they kind of really disappear, right? So when I think about Afghan women and girls, they are physically present, but just because the news cameras have turned off on the women, just because we're not seeing their faces as much, doesn't mean that they're not there. And the moment that we stop talking about Afghan women and girls, that's a detriment to us, and it really does impact their ability to thrive and to live on, and to reach the potential that they're supposed to reach. So while they're not necessarily in the position that my mother is in, thank God a lot of them are around. I just hope that people who are watching this today will always remember that it's important to continue sharing their stories, continue saying their names, because the moment we stop, that becomes a huge problem.
Wow. So Sanjan, the leader that you are, the woman that you are, thank you. Thank you honestly for everything that you do, for the light that you bring to the world. Despite everything that's going on, you're a huge inspiration to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people who are watching this. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you, Nila Joan. I appreciate it.
Until next episode of Nexus Talk, stay informed, stay inspired.